Why is it that in just 2.5 decades, the way we talk to each other has changed more than communication has over the past 2,000 years? It's hard to imagine that the United States Department of Defense could even conceive what they were creating when they first attempted to connect themselves across the country as a means of communication. Of course, it only makes sense that the government would want to be able to connect more easily in case of emergency. But throughout history, the evolution of technology has always kept ease of communication in the back of its mind. Inventions such as paper, the telegram, the phone, the radio, and many others were all in service of spreading their voice further, so when the US government set out to create a quick form of communication through the use of the newest technology of the day, computers, they accidentally created something that would change the world and the way we communicate in it forever. How exactly did it end up this way, though? In the late 80s, the World Wide Web was used for two things: government communication and inter-college communication. I doubt that if you told a young person today that the internet has ever been something beside the jumble of social media, videos, stores, and niche sites it is now, that they would believe you. However, the massive mess that over half the world is connected to now was certainly not made with the general consumer in mind, and only when companies and governments began seeing the viability in it to sell things did it truly spark the idea of a consumer-based internet service. The days of multiple-hour image downloads and instant messaging programs were born, and a generation of children came with it. If you were born after 1990 and live in any first world nation, there is an incredibly high chance that the internet is something that has always just been there. This is the case for me. Born on the 3rd of September in 1994 to a mother who was a nurse and a father who worked at a cable company, I grew up in a home environment which made ignoring the internet impossible. However, the mid to late 90s and early 2000s were a Wild West era of the internet, which viruses were rampant, pop-up ads were common, and that one guy would not stop telling you that you had won. It only makes sense that parents would be cautious of this new landscape, and while some of my peers were given free rein to roam the web, due to the lack of understanding from their caretakers, mine were far more privy to the seedier side of the World Wide Web. By the early 2000s, due to successes like Google, eBay, and others, companies started to understand one thing: the internet was where the money was at, and the money was for the taking. Soon enough, every corporation and their mother needed to have a website, and it was around this time that I became keenly aware to its existence. I was a reclusive child, never particularly driven to venture out with my peers, save for a few friends who lived nearby that shared my passion for video games and movies. However, under the guidance of my friend Morgan, I found myself stumbling upon a side of the internet completely opposite to the economic blitz that was taking place on other sites: free online flash games. Looking back on it now, I would not hesitate to say that nearly every single game you could find that was published on the internet in the late 90s and early 2000s was amateurish at best. There were a few standouts, but the vast majority were quickly thrown together by hobbyists and people my age who were testing the waters of game and video creation. These were usually of lower quality than Facebook games are now, but there was a genuine passion and interest put into creating these games that made them immensely fun for me and my friends to play. Throughout this period, myself, as well as my closest friends, began creating our own videos and claymations in a similar youthful exposition of our passion for online creativity. For me personally, my first foray into the unknown that was online contact with others was a quaint little site called MySpace, run by everybody's best friend, Tom. MySpace was a new and exciting proposition, as it allowed you to easily make your own terrible, uninteresting website and show it off to all your friends who more than likely had personal profiles just as terrible, cringeworthy, and uninteresting as yours. However, there was a genuine excitement to this era, as there was now a platform to easily share and show off hobbies, interests, and thoughts without signing up to a niche message board. And while we do look back upon MySpace with a bit of a snarky outlook, it's hard to deny the cultural impact it had, and the bricks it laid for future social networking websites. While I can look back on MySpace fondly, it was certainly not incredibly important to me, more of a novelty, a first step. However, it was about this time in 2005, when I was in 5th grade, that I became aware of something that would change my life forever. RuneScape was my first truly online game, in which I was in a world with thousands of people I had never met before in my life, and while it may seem that I'm being a bit overdramatic, It is hard for me to stress just how eye-opening the idea of a massively multiplayer open world was to me. My quiet nature had led to me becoming invisible among my peers. Outside of school, I spent many weekends having the time of my life with my friends, but during school, due to unfortunate class placement, I was separated from my closest chums, and a combination of laziness and shyness turned me away from my peers. So the fact that I could go home and shed my shy awkwardness by stepping into a virtual world really helped me along. RuneScape, like many other online games, was a tempest of vile insults hurled from child to child. However, there was no artifice to it. There were no appearances, no social standings, no eggshells to step on. It was complete meritocracy in which a person could drag themselves up to the top through hard work, and everyone had a fair shot at being the best. I spent countless hours in RuneScape chopping trees, mining rocks, killing goblins, and questing to my heart's content. Along the way, I'd meet people, talk to them, add them to my friends list, talk to them some more, and more and more, until every day I was waiting on the bus to get home and chat with my pals who I would never, ever know the name or face of. However, as I mentioned before, being friends and at the same time perfect strangers allowed us to be true friends. And while the years have passed, I've forgotten almost all of the usernames of the people I spent countless hours talking to online. It's hard for me to look back on those times negatively, as I was able to grow and learn how to communicate in ways I had never been able to before. Gaming and the internet are eternally intertwined for me, but at this point a new player had joined the game, and it would be impossible for me to ignore it. So I'll head back to the online games later. For now, I would like to discuss a site that I'm sure every one of you is aware of, because you're watching this video on it right now. YouTube was something special in its early days. This incredible platform allowed myself and many of my peers to watch content created by our peers. It was something fresh and new that threw off the shackles of broadcast television and allowed for complete creative freedom. It was around this time that my friends and I were completely involved in video making. We made sketch after sketch involving fake news reports, action movie-esque gunfights, and Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith rap battles. I still have a few videos to look back fondly upon. My friend Dan even managed to get some minor success with one of his videos, raking in over 40,000 views. It's easy to look back on those days with nostalgia, but eventually it had to pass. The age gap between Dan, Sam, and myself, and our friend Morgan, who was a year younger, began to wear away at our relationship. Just as this transition was happening, my life was changed in a way I would never be able to expect. In the spring of 2007, there was a massive storm in April that knocked power out for many days in my hometown. While it slowly came back for the surrounding areas, my neighborhood was one of the last to get it. So to help stem the tide of boredom, my family went to see a movie. However, on our trip home, we received a call from my aunt, letting us know that our house had caught on fire. Thanks to the quick eye of our neighbor and the nearby police officer who was directing traffic while the roads were being cleaned, firefighters were able to respond quickly and douse the fire before the house was completely lost. However, 2 of my 3 pets were lost in the fire, and it took months to remove the smoke-damaged parts and rebuild. Though my family members were safe, and our extended family and friends were incredibly generous and kind, the stress of the situation drove me further into isolation, and out of an attempt to help my brother and I keep our mind off the house fire, my parents finally relented to give us something that we had been begging for quite a while. This was the largest MMORPG of all time, World of Warcraft. I'm sure looking back on it now, my parents immensely regret allowing my sibling and I to play this game, but barely a week down the rabbit hole, both of us were addicted. However, diving into this new game brought to the forefront the same feelings I had felt playing RuneScape, but to a far greater degree. Soon my brother and I were joining guilds with other players and stepping into a new world, which was probably the most important part of my growing socializing skills, that being VoIP, or Voice over IP. Think of it as Skype, but much more consistent, and being able to talk with random people from all over America, sometimes even further beyond, gave me an opportunity that I had found myself unable to take when I was younger. The ability to hold a direct conversation with people I barely knew. Spending a few nights a week talking to people really helped me grow in my ability to interact with others, and a few years into high school I started talking openly with my classmates rather than the few people I considered my friends. This spread to other games, and eventually almost every game I joined had some sort of voice communication, which further strengthened my ability to speak up. This grew to the point in which I was now usually the most talkative person on my team or in my call. This is night and day for someone who could barely get a word in during primary education. So being online has helped me socialize better, And while it may not be the healthiest or most normal way of learning to speak to others in some people's eyes, it has allowed me to become friends with people that I really consider close, even though I've just met them online. Some people consider that relationships between people who are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, to be objectively weaker than one that is face-to-face. But I've met people online who I consider irreplaceable friends. While I can't say the friends I made online can ever come as close to the friendship I have with my lifelong friends, Sam and Dan, I would be in a much worse place if it weren't for those people that I met over the web. For a long while, I didn't even call them by their name, but rather by their internet handle. As we did not meet face-to-face, there was no need to judge on looks or social standing. Our friendship was based solely off enjoying playing games together and indulging in our hobbies, which would usually draw ire from our peers in a free and open fashion. It gave me an outlet that I never had in real life, save for my two closest pals. This group of friends has been close and unwavering for well over half a decade now. And though they're physically far away, they were more than enough to keep me happy and content. I still look back fondly on my online upbringing and the friends I made along the way. Just like in real life, many people I met online went their separate ways, but some of them have remained incredibly close, and I value their friendship a lot. They're people I can rely on, confide in, and laugh with. And while most of them I've only ever met in real life a few times, I've talked with them for thousands of hours, and there's no way that I could consider them anything less than the closest of friends. Being online has allowed me one final luxury that previous generations were not able to take advantage of. I've certainly forged friendships online, but I've also been able to maintain and manage friendships because of the instant interconnectivity of this venue. This was incredibly important after high school ended. While Dan and I had remained incredibly close and had spent a lot of time together throughout our education, near the end, Sam and I had slowly begun to drift apart. However, once we were free, our shared interest in games and our immense amount of free time before we started college slowly began pulling us back together. I can say quite assuredly that a person I now consider as close as a brother would probably not be my friend anymore if it wasn't for the internet and the ability to contact him so easily online. Once college and other life circumstances separated myself from my closest friends, the ability to stay in close contact, talk with, and play games with these two allowed my best friends and I to stay in near constant contact over the many months that we could not feasibly hang out in person together regularly. We were able to spend just as much time together doing what we loved. And even if I did not have the vast amount of friends I made online over time, I can genuinely say that I am content with the two friends who I've spent a lifetime with. And the ability to connect online has helped keep this friendship as strong as ever, even when Sam was off at college for 4 years and Dan moved halfway across the country. I can't even begin to imagine a life without this ability, and I can't stress how important I believe the internet is to my life. I've spent a long time mulling over every way the internet has impacted my life, and I cannot help but look happily back over those times. It may not be the most standard childhood, and certainly is nothing like how my parents or grandparents grew up. But I personally believe it was just as valid an upbringing as those who spent the majority of their time running around town with other kids. And I hope for those who do not understand how anyone could possibly spend so much of their youth on a computer, that I have at least shed a little bit of light on why a person can do it. And that you can now understand a bit why I believe that many people from my generation who have their noses glued to computers, iPhones, tablets, and gaming consoles may not be as socially isolated as you might think. Because the internet is a giant interconnected web with a person at the end of every thread, and I am just one of them. Thank you for watching.